Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the fourth in our five-part series featuring writers of African heritage. My name is Mary Terrace, and I am the founder of Strive Publishing and a founding member of the Minnesota Black Publishing Arts Collaborative. The Minnesota Black Publishing Arts Collaborative is made up of the following Black-led agencies: Strive Publishing, Papyrus Publishing, Planting People Growing Justice Press, In Black Ink, and Wise Ink Creative Publishing. These agencies have committed to challenge and change the narrative of Black people in the stories we uplift, the books we publish, archive, and share, as well as in the work we do with our constituents to address and challenge the single narratives and the huge disparities in the publishing arts field. I would like to acknowledge and give special thanks to Sister Raquette Ciazar of In Black Ink and Brother Anura Ciazar of Papyrus Publishing for their diligence in connecting the collaborative and the community with the writers who have distinguished our panel discussions throughout this Writers of African Heritage series. Today, we welcome writers raised by multi-ethnic parents, a dynamic panel with four amazing writers who will explore and discuss how identity and life experiences impact their writing and the communities they connect with. Our moderator for today is Dr. Brian Lozinski, who will introduce each writer. Right now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Brian Lozinski. He is an associate professor of urban and multicultural education in the Educational Studies Department at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. His research explores the intersections of critical participatory action research, Black intellectual traditions in education, and cultural sustainability. Thank you, Dr. Brian Lozinski, for moderating our panel today, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Incredibly excited to be here today and to be seeing everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us for this, this exciting panel. I am going to start by briefly, before introducing our panelists, just say a little bit about why it's important for us to understand connections and relationships between our complex, forming, and multiple identities and its impact on how we think about and how we theorize about our writing processes. And so we know that as we conceptualize Blackness, Africanness, race, and its intersections with gender and sexuality, and social class, and all of the other markers of identity, we begin to see this really complex matrix forming. And of course, that matrix plays out in terms of how we write and how our writing is received by those in our communities and those outside of our communities. And so I think to today's panel, we want to really push and try to delve deep into the complex inner workings of these multiple intersectional identities and how this plays out, particularly when we think about writers who have parents of different ethnic heritages. And so I'm gonna go ahead and if we could pull up the bios, get started in introducing our panelists. So first, we have Shannon Gibney, who's a writer, educator, activist, and the author of See No Color and Dream Country, young adult novels that won Minnesota Book Award in 2016 and 2019. Professor Gibney is a faculty in English in Minneapolis College, where she's teaching writing, a Bush artist and McKnight Writing Fellow. Her new book, Botched, explores themes of transracial adoption through speculative memoir. It will be released in 2023. She's also at work on a young adult anthology of short stories about adoptees by adoptees with writer Nicole Chung. We also have Joey Reese. She's the founder and executive director of the Practice Center. The Practice Center exists to teach, facilitate, and inspire mindful skill building and consistent practice of mindfulness, forgiveness, and attitudinal healing principles. Reese was born in Korea and raised in Minnesota, now resides and works in Hawaii. Wish we were there right now. Also writes a blog on healing and transformation. So thank you. Dr. Adam Bledsoe is an assistant professor in the Department of Geography, Environment, and Society at the University of Minnesota. He was born and raised in the Twin Cities and works to educate people of all ages about the African diaspora and its many complexities. His passion, professional and personal goals are to help foster recognition and connections among the various populations of the African diaspora. Some of his research interests are in Black geographies, the African diaspora, and political geography. And last but certainly not least, we have Kimberlee Miller, who's a writer, performing artist, activist, businesswoman, and native of Minneapolis, Minnesota. She has toured and worked all over the United States and abroad. She's the founder of reconstruction.us. Her new book on personal and social transformation includes some of the essays presented on her website and will be available soon. So thank you again to all of the panelists and for the audience for joining us in what will be a really insightful discussion. So I want to start off by having each of you talk a little bit about your backgrounds and your upbringing in particular. You know, when we think about this idea of having parents of different ethnicities, certainly there's you know, a liminal space, a hybridity that we're exposed to at a very young age. So could you talk a little bit about your upbringing and help us trace, you know, for briefly, help trace us into your movement into becoming a writer. So Kimberlee, would you like to start?
Hi, I'd be happy to. Hi, everybody. Sure. So I was born in 1962 and grew up right here in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis. My mother is European American and my father's African American. And that actually means I'm about 7 different ethnicities. And in terms of, yeah, I guess that's kind of really it in terms of my background. Is there something else? Did I miss part of your question though? Sorry.
Yeah, if you could help link it to your initiation to becoming a writer, author.
Oh, well, I have actually mostly thought about my desire to write as being all about trying to share my experience as being mixed heritage. I felt since I was very young that it was an important experience to talk about, because I really feel like it's a unique position for any of us of mixed heritage and gives us an opportunity to look at our country and the world with a little bit different lens than most people have the opportunity to. And hopefully that is something that can help really unite us.
Great, thank you. Joey, I'll toss it over to you. Same question.
All right. Thanks, Brian. It's lovely to be here with everyone. It's Hawaii, but it is a little chilly. So if you see me doing this, we're in a cold setting right now. So I'm an African-American woman who was born in Korea to a Korean mother. So from the age of awareness, whenever that was, I knew that I was another. And a bulk of my early years up to 8.5, it was about just surviving it. I knew that it was wrong to be Black. I knew that that was something that I had to apologize for or behave in a certain kind of way. Definitely, it was not something that I could cry about, whine about. It's just run faster, duck harder, and survive. Knowing that eventually myself and all of my other mixed counterparts would be shipped off to the US at some point. I knew from the very inception that that's what would happen. I just didn't know how. Kids were just disappearing left and right. And we were being sent to orphanages, a lot of Minnesota folks. We're sending social workers to kind of corral us up and ship us off in, in my mind, it's containers, but yeah, in flights. And then I was put into a home in Spring Grove, Minnesota, where it's a town of 1,000 people at the time. And it's the biggest Norwegian community in North America. And so that was a significant shift, but always I saw myself kind of outside of my body. So it was a consciousness that was kind of following myself. And I could see that I was living in Korea. Now I had to figure out how to survive and learn this language of European Americans. And so I did a lot of kind of putting on characters to survive. And to a certain degree, I think the body made it out. I think as the years continued, we moved from Minnesota to Iowa to Kansas. And then ultimately I ended up going to school in Richmond, Indiana, a little Quaker school. Yet again, another school of 1,000 people, very small, and an African-American population about 54 when I was there as a freshman. And so a couple of things happened. One year in my formative teen years, I was living in Des Moines, Iowa, and it was just white people is all I saw. I rarely saw reflections of myself. So my reflection in my mind was also white, I think, because there was a moment when I was running up the stairs and I caught myself in the mirror and I had to stop because there was this Black girl staring back. And I was like, who the hell is this Black girl staring back? And I remember very clearly having that visceral thought. And then I continued about my day. And then we fast forward to my experience in Richmond, Indiana. It's 50 some odd Black folks. And I ended up befriending several of them, ended up being invited to a party. And at this party, it was a house party. You guys, in the late 80s, early 90s, those of you who remember those house parties, right? So I'm in this house party, and then it's like the room filled up with smoke. It felt like that. Everything went into slow motion because as I looked around, everyone was Black. And I had never been in a space where everyone was Black. And separate than my reflection catching me off guard, knowing that that was weird, it's in that moment that I felt like this kind of oneness, like, oh, this is who I am. And so like any normal person, I immediately dropped out of school, moved to Kenya, and then ended up in Jamaica, trying to find this Blackness, this brown, like, who am I? And then I came back home with the baby and went back to school because I knew that I needed to finish school. And my schooling, I got decent grades, but I was never writing as me. I was just finishing an assignment. But there was an assignment when I went back to school as a young adult in my 20s. And the question was really, to me, stupid, because it was like, should doctors should they have the right to not treat certain people because they know they have these internalized biases? And I'm like, we're living in the US. Everybody has internalized biases. And of course, we as Black folks are getting misdiagnosed, misserved, yes, doctors should be held accountable. And yes, we know these biases exist, but the question is wrong. That's what I was thinking. So actually that moment, I decided to write about that. I wrote from where I felt in a way that I've never written before. And then the feedback I got back was, wow, you sound really angry. And I thought, I am angry. And it came through on this paper. And I think that was the first inkling that I thought I could actually get my feels and how I saw the world through on paper. I do not consider myself a writer. I consider myself a translator of my life and trying to help others understand. So this writing thing is still a little difficult for me to grasp, but that is the moment in my young adulthood where I was like, ooh, this writing thing is kind of cool, that I can like use this other medium and get my through. So I hope to continue to hone that skill a little bit more skillfully, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you. That powerful, Tracy. I really love that idea of this idea of translating our lives for others. Makes a lot of sense. Adam, I'm going to turn to you. Can you tell us a bit about your upbringing and your movement into writing.
Sure, yeah. So I'm from the Twin Cities as well. My dad is Black. He's originally from Milwaukee. His parents were originally from Tennessee and moved north during what we call the Great Migration. So shortly after World War II, they moved up to Milwaukee and raised their family there. My mom is white, and her family is from a few generations from St. Paul. So there's always this question kind of like, when did you realize you were Black? And I don't really remember exactly if I had like an aha moment of oh my God, I'm Black. But I do remember thinking it was odd when I would go to school, because I went to school with mostly white kids, though the questions that I would get when I'd be up there with my mom, right? Like, why do you look like that, but your mom looks like that, and things like that. But I feel really fortunate, and I was very fortunate that my father was very, very proactive in educating us about, the African diaspora, Black history, and that kind of stuff, with the films he had us watch, the things he had us read, in the spaces that he brought us to and put us in. And so, I guess at a fairly early age, I remember that education starting around 7 years old, 6, 7 years old, when we're being exposed to histories of transatlantic slavery and learning about, the Black Power movement and learning about all this stuff. And so kind of like Joe Yee said, one of my earliest memories also was being a really angry kid, being really mad that, my history wasn't being reflected back to me in the spaces that I had to go into every day in, the schools that I went to. I did some traveling at a young age as well, went to Ghana, Africa, with a group of people from the Twin Cities. And I think that was kind of one of those moments when it opened my eyes that, you hear about Africa, right? You might read about Africa, but actually going there and seeing like, this is a whole place full of Black people, right? And they're running things and they're doing things, living life. That was really an eye-opening kind of moment for me. And then when I got to college out east, being opened up to Black people from all different places, right? The Caribbean, South America, and meeting all these people from all these different places, and realizing, I think sometimes in the United States, we get a feeling like we're the only ones a lot of the time, right? Or we're the only ones that we have access to, the only Black people that we have access to. And being able to travel in college, being able to travel as a young person and get to meet Black people in the Dominican Republic and Haiti and Brazil and Uruguay and, all these areas of Latin America, it was so exciting, right? It was like this whole new world was opened up to me. And so my first kind of, I guess, foray into writing, maybe not specifically about my personal experiences, but my first writings on reflecting on Blackness, right? And what it means was a thesis that I wrote as an undergraduate. And it was really exciting to be able to, sit and read different accounts, right, in Spanish, in English, about, histories of the Caribbean and all of these different things, and be able to sit and formulate an argument, right? Trying to understand why racism takes shape the way it does in certain places, right? And it oftentimes looks different depending on where you are. But not only does racism take shape in different places, but Black people's ideas about what we need and what we want are also different across space and time as well. And so my undergraduate thesis was really the first kind of attempt at writing on these questions. And then I went on to graduate school, and now I teach, and in a way I write for a living. Everyone thinks professors, teaching is the main thing you do, but in reality, it's publications that are the thing that a lot of universities want for you or from you. So that, I've continued, I think, in that vein. That anger, like Joe, you said, the anger is still there. I'm still angry, right? But I'm also, I'm also really, I feel uplifted and really inspired, by our people, by Black people, right? And everything that we've gone through and done. And so I try to reflect that in the writings that I do now. Thank you.
Yeah, and definitely hearing, these common experiences of travel, the expansion with regard to our educational experiences, and then also this translation from anger into possibility. through our writing practice is really important. Professor Gibney, I'm going to turn it over to you. Same question. Good to see you.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Yeah, what a great topic and gathering of folks. Thanks for making it happen. So I was, and I really appreciated the other panelists' comments as well. A lot of what you're saying was resonating with me. And I'm sure we'll get more into that as the panel goes on. But I was born in 1975 and adopted about 6 months later into a white family in Ann Arbor, Michigan. My birth mother was white, Irish American. My birth father is African American. So it took me a lot of years to kind of come to an understanding or a sort of a name for myself that I feel like somewhat adequately encompasses how I move through the world, and that would be a mixed Black transracial adoptee. You know, because all those identities are those are the ones that sort of I feel like overdetermine where I go, how I go there, how I show up, how I don't show up, etc. I should also say I'm a single mom, and so you hear my dog in the background. I've got 2 children. They're also up here. So there's, yeah, you just probably heard that too. There's Legos going on here. So this is just like the backdrop of my life. It's interesting too, like a lot of my writing is, you know, writing is about your life, right? And so these are characters that frequently appear in my work. And so yeah, so the theme of kind of anger and confusion, I think, like that, yeah, that's very familiar to me, especially I think in adolescence. Transracial adoptees a lot of times talk about how you know, it's a hyper visible experience. So when you go out with your family, or you know, anybody from your family, people are always looking at you, right? And people will come up to you, mostly white people, but not always, you know, like oh, that's your mom. You know, like oh wait, or my brother's in high school, like, how is it your brother, you know? And these, yeah.
One time at school, this girl thought that me and Dan were brothers.
Okay, that's weird. Just because you're Black, that's weird. We'll talk about that later. So yeah, so yes, I have frequent contributors as well to the discussions. So, you know, people just asking you these super personal questions that it's just like inappropriate, but they somehow feel that it's okay to do so because they can't, like, they just have to know, right? And then also, I do feel like, I mean, living in the Twin Cities is sort of like the height of mixedness. You know, there's a lot of mixed folks, but certainly in Ann Arbor in the 1980s and 90s when I was growing up, it was, you know, I mean, I'm not trying to say it's like all hunky-dory now, but it was definitely not okay to have hair like mine, and to, you know, skin tone, and then, you know, sort of all the cultural affects of whiteness. And so people would, I mean, other kids would come up to me and be like, what are you?
What are you?
What are you?
What is that question?
I know, it's ridiculous. So yeah, so that's, I know.
Why?
Okay.
Eating
Okay,
rolls?
I have to finish. Okay, this is Boise. This is my son.
Hello.
Yeah, and so it's very interesting. Yeah, he's 11 and he's at Anderson, and his dad is Liberian.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're African American,
Yeah.
but you're also like Liberian American as well. So
Yeah.
our family has continued in the next generation to also and I hate the word diversify, but sort of the levels of intercultural mixing have continued, right? And so I don't know, have you ever been out with grandma and grandpa who are white, right? And like has anybody ever said anything to you guys, like, or with Uncle John or Aunt Megan or anything? Like, have you ever felt weird? Like, no?
No,
Not really? Okay.
I don't think so, at least.
You don't think so? Okay, that's cool. So I
I
felt,
think it's also because I felt I'm just like my grandpa and grandpa, but these are my aunt and uncles.
right. So like you're,
Because usually they take me to places where I've been to, with you, so they might be like, who are these people? And I'm like, they're my aunt and uncle.
yeah. So there was a time definitely when I was coming up where I felt like I was going to find my people, definitely in the teenage years, right, where that's common, but it's just compounded if you're, from a historically marginalized community. Okay, can you wait until I'm done? Yes, okay. But yeah, so what I always say what happened, what I realized was happening in my probably mid to late 20s was that I became more comfortable being uncomfortable. And I realized that that was a skill and that I wasn't going to find like just sort of like, oh, Black people over here, transracial adoptees over here, mixed people over here, women of color over here, writers over here. It's like I just moved through all these different communities and I don't need to like center myself the way perhaps a white person might need to.
Yeah, that's a really powerful segue, I think, into the next set of questions, which are about this idea of community, right? So, thinking about these ideas that we're using writing to accomplish certain things, there's a certain purpose, whether that's about translation, whether it's about taking perspective, but we could also be using writing to shape community, to recruit community, and also to complicate notions within our community. I think sometimes we might be thinking about how monolithic understandings of race, particularly around Blackness, become rather limiting when we think about Black folks globally, right? And then also within the confines of the United States. And so the next question that I want to pose is about the purpose of your work, and then specifically the audiences that you find yourself writing to, and how are you connecting your work to this idea of developing community, and how is that connected to to the identities that you each described. And I would like to hear from everybody on this. So maybe we can shake up the order a little bit. So Joey, do you want to take that one first?
Just a light question. Sure, I'll take that first. So as you were asking that very complex question, I'm going, oh gosh, how do you enter into an answer for that? And immediately what came to mind is I was adopted into a Lutheran minister's home. So a lot of Lutheran ministers were getting into the business of adopting kids in the 70s. So 1979, that's where I arrived. And he had moved to Spring Grove to take on this new congregation. And my English was very limited because I'm Korean. I had to learn everything anew, but I had enough understanding. But more importantly, I really was honing in, just being Black in Korea too, honing in on all of the other cues, right? You don't just listen to words, you listen to everything else. And so I'm sitting in church, very first service, and everybody's standing up, and I had some access to Christian religions in Korea. There was, lots of tent revival stuff that was happening in Korea. Anytime there's, the poor and the disenfranchised, Christianity has a way of coming in and selling us hope. So I had some experience with Christian churches in Korea. So here I am in this lovely Lutheran church in Spring Grove, Minnesota. Everybody's standing up and they're saying the Lord's Prayer. So it's a prayer of reverence, right? But as I'm watching body language, I remember thinking in my tiny little 8.5-year-old body, I was like, they're all lying. That's the biggest feeling I had, is that they're all lying. But I knew that I had to pretend like their lies were truths. And so it felt very complicated, and yet I knew exactly what I was being asked. So going through school, I knew that people would tell me a version of who they thought I was, and I would have to smile and nod. And moving through the rest of society, there's just like commodification, especially as a Black woman that looks a certain kind of way. I was both othered and exotified and commodified. So that access, Professor Shannon, when you were talking about like, what are you? Not only that, but, and then like have the right to touch you, right? So you just never really had this protective layer. You had to just kind of move through and smile. So that's the bulk of my anger, where that was coming from. Like, you're making me play this game that doesn't, it's bullshit, excuse me. It's, to me, I knew that from young. And if I know that, I know you know that, and yet here we are playing. So moving on, I think from that paper, from them becoming a parent, from then having to like either figure this out or succumb to the weight of living, I think there was a moment where I thought, okay, if everybody's full of crap, either I'm gonna have to be a part of that, or I'm gonna have to find another way. And I think a lot of my other way was, I think I am okay being labeled the aggressive person, the angry person, the person who just says it like it is, the person who's cold. Like, I've had a lot of those assessments charged at me from very young. So I thought, well, why don't I just start telling whatever version of my truth is, because I'm gonna get it either way. So then I think the way that my writing, a lot of my writing is script for the videos that I make. It's in the workshop trainings that I produce. It's in the workbooks, that kind of writing. And when I say it that I'm translating, is that for my own healing work, I had to look at, well, who's doing the research? And it tends to be a lot of white men from academia, right? A lot of that also tends to be in the head. And as I went back to think about my first experience, I would rethink about that church experience and go, well, maybe they weren't lying. Maybe it's a lack of embodiment, which is then what I was taught. Is like, you walk around in your head, if you know things in your head, and if you say the right things, then that's good. And I thought, but my body's hurting, right? I'm disconnected to my body. So then what does this embodiment, what does that mean? So I take the work of academics or people who, then I'm in the social field work, the social work world, where I'm working with at-risk youth, right? And when you work with at-risk youth, what they mean is Black and brown children. And what they really mean is Black and brown boys. That's how, in my 30 years of working in high-risk populations, that's what really means. So you're taking these highly vetted, highly paid for curriculum developed by white academic men, and then we're taught to apply that to our children, Black and brown children. And I thought there's something missing. And it's this embodiment piece. Like, how do you actually have a relationship? How do you actually fully show up? How do you actually really touch each other human to human, that essence to essence, versus first do this, second do that. Although my brain really needs that. I need the steps. Like, tell me what's wrong with me. Tell me how to fix it is basically the cry I think I was wandering around with. So as I find these answers, I go, okay, these are good ideas. Now what I can show you is how to apply that and how to actually feel that, so you feel whole, so that we're not just passing around lip service. So the work that I do, I find that I take somebody's good idea and then I say, knowing this stuff is not good enough, let's figure out how can you apply it? And then how do you know that you've applied it? So I'll say, like, any of the toxic positivity comments, right? Like, what does it mean to be happy? Like, it's important to be happy, people say. Like, you really go out and live your best life. well, how the heck do you do that? How do you know you've done that? How do you like feel it? So then I go, okay, let me try this out in myself. And then I try and write scripts for my videos, or write the curriculum, so that in the workshops, I can make it come alive. And I think that is the Indigenous experience, or people of color or African experience. It's really the embodiment, or making these words come to life. So I don't know if that fully answers it, but I think my view that people who think that they know, have the degrees that say that they know, a lot of times don't know. And there is some value in this gritty, from the ground, looking up at you my whole life. I have something to say. I'm looking at some stink. I know what's not working. And I also know how to make it work for somebody like me, who didn't know who they were, who weren't taught, who was taught actually to not know themselves, and that would be the best way to get ahead. And now I feel like I'm doing some service. If I'm not working with African people specifically, I'm working with the people who are then in charge of teaching us. And I feel I have some foundation to say, you're doing it wrong. And I guess I'm made enough that I can get away with some of that. So I think that's here in Hawaii, we would say kuleana. That's our responsibility. That's my responsibility. That if I can walk into spaces and go, this is not accessible to me or to the people that I work with, but I can make your work accessible to me and my people. And people have let me do it. So I write about it and I teach about it. I make workshops about it now.
That's a powerful intervention, right? And an appropriation of in a way that really grapples with power. Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you. Can you tell us about how you understand the purpose of your work and its relationship to developing or connecting to community?
Wow, this is a fantastic discussion. I think at the core, I've just always been an activist, and that is the essence of all the work I've done, and definitely of my writing as well. Because what I'm trying to do is change the world. That's the truth, and I'm trying to do that in the hopes that my particular perspective, as being neither or both, always in between, a part of, not a part of, actually can help with somewhat of the other panelists were talking about in terms of kind of translation and hopefully transmuting into the kind of society I would really like us to be. I mean, that's really, kind of it for me. So developing community, well, I have to kind of take a step back and just share that, I've never felt I fit, because I've been told consistently, you don't. I'm not dark enough to be considered Black enough. I'm not white enough to be considered white enough. And, certainly as a kid growing up, as other people have shared, the thing is, it's often assumed for me that because I'm so light-skinned, my hair is soft, that means that therefore I have a lot of privilege. And in some ways that's true. People don't necessarily recognize that I'm African-American right away, at least not in the northern states. In the southern states, I never had that problem, ever. People always knew immediately that I was Black. And that was really transformative for me. But I think that what really formed my identity first as a Black person was an experience that I had in my family when I was about 5 years old, and we were opening Christmas presents, as we did at my mother's house every year, maternal grandmother's house. And this particular year, she decided to pull out another box of presents. And those presents came from people that I had never heard of, who were my great grandparents. And she handed out these presents to everybody but me and my sister and my mother and father. And that was when I learned that I actually had this whole extended family in Wisconsin that I knew nothing about. Didn't know their names, didn't know that all the rest of the relatives saw them on a regular basis, spent Thanksgiving with them, because my mother was disowned for marrying my dad and having me. And so in that moment, at that age of 5 years old, it was the first time that it ever occurred to me that I was that different. I just always felt a part of both my father and my mother. And all of a sudden, I was being told, you're not actually fully human. That's the way I interpreted it. And so ever since that time, I think it has been a long journey of finding my humanity. And for me, that humanity is in being the mixed Black woman that I am. And so what I really try to do in my writing is to share about the ways that being mixed means that I understand all the sides, and I'm never allowed to be a part of any side. And there's some real absurdity in that from a human perspective, right? And so I think that more than anything these days, I wrote an article with the death of George Floyd that a couple of years, well, last year, of course. And that was really what I was trying to get across in that article, that, it's the assumption that I am safe if I am white enough. That is really, I think, where psychologically white people draw the line, not necessarily conscious, some of them consciously, but in a lot of cases, very unconsciously, that, the ways that so many white people, including in my family, were horrified by George Floyd's death, but they weren't afraid. I, as a Black woman, was afraid. And they became afraid when the fire started, and they were worried that it was going to be their own neighborhood that was going to burn. Then all of a sudden, there was this whole level of upsetness that they did not demonstrate earlier in the week. And I think it's those kinds of contradictions that I'm really trying to mirror and express in a way that only if you have lived a mixed life can you really get at.
Thank you. I think, again, those visceral experiences connected, primarily to how whiteness and white folks, I think, attempt to, to position mixed raceness as a buffer in their favor to like act out, to act out anti-Blackness, right? I think came through in your narrative there. Shannon, I'm gonna turn to you. Can you talk to us about how you understand the purpose of your work and its relationship to community?
Yeah, so community is at the center of my work. And really, I would argue all artists' work. We have this whole formulation of the, white male artist who goes in their garret and for hours locks themselves up and writes the masterpiece. And it's just not the case, you look, the more that you sort of like look at these sort of like, paragons of Western literature, right? It's like, well, what enabled them to do that work? Most of them, their wives, of course, were the ones that were, cooking the food, doing the labor, taking care of the house, all this stuff that, created the material conditions for them to create the work, certainly. And then the stories that we write come directly out of community, and so for me, I think definitely growing up as the weird one in many of the ways that the other panelists have been describing, definitely weird one racially, culturally, the weird one in the family. I also identify as a Black nerd, and artists are just always weird, because why would you go, sit by yourself and try to create something that, maybe somebody might want to read sometime, but who knows, maybe not. It's just a weird thing to do if you think about it. And so for me, like, I feel like definitely as I've gotten older and sort of like more grounded in who I am in the world, and again, like the many, many different communities that I walk through, and feel, a sense of kinship with, some of them I feel solidarity with, some of them I feel a sense of kinship with. And I really like the complexity of sort of this mixedness that Kim was getting at, right? That you do have these privileges, right? Like I do, when I talk to my friends who are my girlfriends who are dark skinned, right? And I have not had some of the experiences. It's stark sometimes, like in the same, the exact same institution, somebody approaches me completely differently than they do my larger, dark skinned, brilliant counterpart. And so, yes, there is this skin privilege thing, but then this thing that Kim was talking about, this sense of not feeling like you are deeply embraced by a particular community. That's painful, and that's real. And I referenced, in the chat, Alexander Chi, who is half white, half Korean, I think writes so powerfully about that exact feeling. And so I would urge folks to check out his essay collection. I read it recently, taught it recently, and it just was like, oh my God, this is exactly what it is. So in my work, I really feel like there is this sense of responsibility, that I need to, I'm just sort of like the next in the long line of Black folks, Black writers, that are just trying to get down like what it is to be a human being and be a Black person right now. And I think it was Adam who said, I love being Black. And that's like the same. It took me a long time to get there. I did not want to be Black for all the reasons that I think Joey was talking about. I had I was bullied by Black kids in high school. And it was a long journey for me, but, for the past, I would say, 20 years or so, it's been, and even then though, when I was rejecting Blackness, I still had this, like, people like Baldwin were speaking to me in my teens, in ways that, and Morrison, and, that really, really provided this foundation for me to understand that, like, no, I always say, like, I'm another in the long line of Black folks that have resisted, because that's our tradition as Black folks here, it's resistance. And that resistance takes different forms. And then as an adoptee, so much of what the cultural work that I do is getting our stories out there, right? And so this, collection, it's called Adoptee to Adoptee. It'll be the first anthology that we know of short stories, YA short stories by adoptees for adoptees, because the literature on transracial adoption has been dominated by white adoptive parents who don't identify as such. And then, you know, I have a memoir slash, I call it a speculative memoir novel coming out, Botched. It's probably the weirdest thing I've ever written, but I kind of love it for that. And it gets at a lot of these like absurdities, I think that Joey was talking about, right? Inherent in the experience of, as I say, like living in the heart of America, which is growing, or, you know, growing up in a white family, right? That like says these things, oh, we're colorblind, we don't see color, right? But you know in your body, like, no, you do. You see it all the time. Like, stop that shit. Stop lying, right? And so, I mean, for me, and I also always say, and then I'll be quiet because I know I'm taking up a lot of time, but like, you know, I always say like writing is about telling the truth too. And if you're not telling the truth in your writing and your art, I honestly don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're doing. There's going to be consequences for that. You know, there's going to be, and some of them are going to be, you know, good, and some of them are going to be not so good, right? But yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm also a weird writer in that I'm an extrovert. And so I have a lot, most of my writer friends are introverts. They don't want to go out and present or talk to communities about their work. I love doing that stuff. And so, and kind of, you know, because when you're working on something like a novel, it's like, you know, it's just yours for like, you know, the last one I finished before Botched. I mean, on and off, it took me 20 years to write that bad boy. And so when it's out in the world, you know, it's just yours and then yours and your editors, and then it's out in the world, it becomes something else. It's not yours anymore. It's like having a child, right? And so people are going to be engaging with it in all these different ways and bring it back to you. It be in ways that, you know, some you have imagined, but a lot of them you hadn't even imagined. I just did a workshop over at Brooklyn Center High School where, you know, my second novel, Dream Country, 5 generations of a Liberian and Liberian American family, the first section is set there at Brooklyn Center High School. And so to be, you know, to be in that environment with teachers talking about equity issues, it just, you know, blew my mind. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. A powerful comment around truth telling, right? And Cornel West talks about the truth is often found in our pathway toward truth, right? And so writing is being that pathway. Yeah. Adam, how about you?
Yeah, so that's hard to follow all of these really wonderful and really insightful thoughts and comments. I think there's, you know, with my writing, first of all, I guess I'll speak to the academic writing that I do, because that's the majority of what I do by virtue of the job that I have. You know, I've dabbled in kind of writing op-eds and opinion pieces and things like that, which I, you know, have found very rewarding, and I think, you know, have reached people. But being that the majority of the writing that I do is academic, you know, I guess there's kind of two things that I'm trying to do with it. And on the one hand, you know, I write with the intent of trying to reach other Black thinkers, right, and scholars, you know, whether they be in academia or not, because we're all thinkers, right, and all analysts in our own ways. And so, you know, I do my best to try to reflect back what I've learned, not only in my life, but also in the readings that I've done. And I think some of what Shannon's getting at is you write what you know, right? Hopefully you're writing about what you know about. And, you know, we could probably try to do some kind of psychological experiment to figure out why this is, but, you know, Black studies literature broadly is what I like. You know, I can't give you an exact reason why that is, except for that, you know, when I read the Toni Morrisons, the Saidiya Hartmans, the W.E.B. Du Bois of the world, right, past and present thinkers, I see myself reflected somehow, right? And in different ways, right? There's gender differences, there's class differences, there's time differences. But in all of those works, as I go through them, you know, it's like, this makes sense to me. You know what I'm saying? Like this reflection of the world makes sense to me. This is getting at something about, you know, who I am and what I've experienced. And so I try to reflect that back in the writing that I do. And part of the reason that I do that is I'm a geographer, right? I'm in the geography department. There's not a whole lot of Black geographers, just by the numbers. And that's not satisfactory to me. It's not satisfactory for me to know that Black people are not reflected in any line of thinking or any field. And so, I do these writings again because it is a reflection of who I am, but I also want other aspiring geographers and nascent geographers to look at this and say, okay, there is a place for me here, right? I can look at this, I can read this, hopefully there's some echoes here of something that makes sense to me. And so whenever I get emails from, grad students, Black grad students or undergrads, or somebody reaches out to me and says, hey, we read your thing in my class, would you be willing to come and talk to our class about it? It doesn't happen super frequently, but when it does, it's like, okay, that reading reached somebody, it resonated with somebody, and it meant something to them. The other side, I said there's two things that I really write for. That's the primary one, right? Writing for other Black people, to be in conversation, to see ourselves reflected in the stories that we take in and then act out in the world. The other one is I really want to destabilize and make uncomfortable, right? All of the non-Black people who think they have a handle on this world and understand the world, right? And I'm not going to get into the real nitty-gritty details of it, but geography as a discipline, critical geography is really influenced by critiques of capitalism, right? Marxist critiques of capitalism. And so many of them, right? So many of the well-known books and articles and thinkers don't engage in any meaningful way with Black studies, Black thought, and yet they can talk about something like gentrification in New York, right? Or they can talk about whatever it might be, changes in the political economy, changes in the economy across the United States. Well, an understanding of Black history is required for all of that, right? We need all of that. You need to know this. It's impossible to know it otherwise. And so I really want to, screw them up. You know what I'm saying? I want to make them uncomfortable because I'm uncomfortable, right, by all of this stuff. You don't get to be off the hook for these things. So that's kind of the other side of it. The iconoclastic side, I guess you could say, is wanting to destabilize other people's kind of take it for granted notions of the world. So I don't know if that makes these people part of our community or not, but it's kind of what I'm trying to do.
Thank you for that. I think that really helps us get some clarity on, when we're thinking about community and thinking about it through social and political terms, right? Rather than sometimes what could be problematic identity, just simply, simple, superficial identity-based ideas of community, right? But that if our identity is linked to a particular kind of political thought or a particular kind of liberatory tradition, then we actually have much more to grab onto than kind of like the complexities, right, of all the multiple things that necessarily shape our identities. So we are very quickly running low on time, and I definitely want us to be able to get to some of the really cool questions that I'm seeing popping up in the chat. And I'd like to kind of open this space up for any of our panelists to respond to how you see yourself kind of working through the challenges of our current moment. And again, short responses on this one, because I definitely want to be able to get to our audience questions. So how have you been grappling with and working through the challenges of our particular moment?
Who do you want to speak first?
That's open to anybody.
Shannon, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so I was just gonna say, I think that I'm really lucky because writing has always been a tool for me to figure out what I think and what I feel about things. And so particularly in this really interesting interesting. Political moment that we're in. You know, I have been writing a lot more personal essays than I have been before. And that's been helpful. It's been helpful for me, again, to kind of figure out, well, what do I think of this defunding the police idea? How does that affect the way that I parent my son? What are some of the changes that I'm seeing in him as he grows more into his Black male body? And to sort of explore that on the page is a really potent and transformative thing for me. And then to have it go out into the world and come back to you, and then have people in various parts of communities, you know, want to talk, want to engage around some of those questions and ideas that you put forth. Is also, it feels like a constructive way to move through a lot of these problems, rather than, you know, I think it's easy to go to nihilism, or to you know, just like, well, whatever, this is never going to get fixed. You know, this is a mess. And that's just another way to cop out. So so I'm very thankful that I have that outlet, that I have that tool, and really a community connector. Because also, I mean, just in a very tangible sense, I mean, my writing connects me. You know, I think Adam was talking about, you know, you're part of this larger conversation. And so, I mean, like right now, this conversation that we're having now, the reason why I'm in it is because of my writing. Right. And so that it has like all these really tangible benefits.
You know, last summer, at that time, I had 2 children who were adults, moved off the Big Island. Big Island is vast land in the middle of the ocean where it's pretty, like I can go and sit on a beach and be all by myself, look at the stars all night. I mean, it's really country living. I feel safe all of the time. I am alone. There are not very many Black folks. My 2 youngest kids had moved to Minneapolis. And so during last summer stuff, they were right there. And I remember turning on my camera to do another video, and I just almost lost it. I was like, I'm like, everything that they said about me, that I'm not really Black, is all true. Like, look at me out here in the middle of the ocean, just living my la life, while people are out here actually doing real work, real fighting. Like, I really framed it as, you suck, Joey, and everybody else out there who are really Black are doing the real work of the revolutionary work, is what I was thinking in my mind. Because I, in my heart, think of myself as a revolutionary, and yet here I am sitting, like, living this la life. So in that moment, I was also trying to solidify how I'm going to move forward in my business. And I was working on my focus and my vision and mission statement. And I thought, Joey, all I can worry about is what's present, local, and personal. So that's the motto that I decided to move forward with, because I'm a mindfulness coach. I teach forgiveness. And so if I can't rely on what is true for me in this moment, what's personal, what's local, right? And what's in my immediate community, how can I impact change here? And so I keep saying yes to speaking. I say yes to conferences. I say yes when people ask, can you come and train this group? I say yes. And through that work, I have had folks going, we're having a really hard time with these communities. Can you come and talk about that? So I'm like, sure, I can do some research. I can do some work. So from that base of, I can't lose myself. I can't vacillate between this void of nothing will ever matter to, I got to do everything. Like, that swing is too far. I most often have felt lost in one of those most of my growing up years. So as I've come to some wisdom in my age, to feel really grounded, saying, if I can just focus on what's meaningful now, trust myself to somewhat, speak up when necessary, that has allowed me, I think, to stay relatively sane in what feels like insanity that we've created. So local, present, personal, like right here in this community. That's how I move.
Yeah, I'll just, I guess, kind of talk quick. It's yeah, it really resonates with me what Joy just said about the present, local, and personal, right? Because trying to make sense of what's going on now, I think requires understanding really where we come from, right? Those of us, well, no matter where you are, whether you're in the Twin Cities or elsewhere, I think a history of a place, right? Like the Twin Cities is a really important sort of foundation for understanding where we are today. And so that's my next, without jinxing it, that's my next big writing project that I want to take on is a history of how we got here today in the Twin Cities, right? A history of Black politics and activism. And I started that work a little bit. It's been amazing, to start gathering these stories, some of which are written, some of which, well, Shannon, I got to write it first, so it might be a little while before it's ready. But getting those stories which are both written and not written, right? Stories that are verbal, stories that are artistic. Taking all of these things and kind of trying to make sense of them. It's been really overwhelming in a way, but positively overwhelming in the sense that it's a really amazing place. The community here is really amazing. There's been so much that's happened here to bring us to where we are. And there'll be a lot more that carries us into the future, so that's kind of my, big dream, writing dream that I'm slowly working towards.
Yeah, for me, I think it's really been two main things. One is that, frankly, I, was in lockdown, of course, like most of us, when George Floyd happened. And that's when I really started writing. And I have to say, I feel like the gift in that for me has been that I've stopped being afraid to say what I really think. I'm not sugarcoating it so much. I'm not sort of back burnering some of my real passionate, thoughts. Because it's like, I'm going to be 60 next year. So for me, it's like, if not now, when, and particularly in this moment, because I'm very afraid for all of us in this moment. We are in some really scary times. And I think that the key issue for me, well, not issue, but experience that has really informed my writing has been the 9 years that I spent in the Deep South. Because living in Minnesota, living in California, were different experiences, but they left me still confused. And when I moved to the Deep South, there was never any question in anybody's mind as to whether or not I was Black. And I was treated accordingly. And that was a huge relief. But it also gave me an opportunity to really have my eyes open to how much the South has never stopped fighting the Civil War. And we are very much living in a country now where that culture has bled its way all across our nation. That is the fight that is before us now. And therefore, it is my sincere hope that through the work I'm doing and that all of us are doing, that we can really be a part of really taking that bull by the horn, so to speak, and hopefully carrying that football, a little further down the field, to use yet another analogy. But I just want to say that, I don't think if it hadn't have been for COVID and George Floyd, I ever would have started my blog, reconstruction.us. That was really what kind of said, you know what, it's time to just put it out there and let the chips fall where they may. And I feel like that has been a real positive, thing that a lot of writing has come out of, and a lot of activism in all kinds of ways for us.
Thank you for that, Kim, and everyone. It makes me think about Robin D.G. Kelly, who talks about what he imagines that this time period represents kind of a fourth Reconstruction in the United States, and that if we were able to see that with some kind of historical hindsight, might help us enact different possibilities. I want to, there's a question in the chat from Anthony. And Anthony, I don't know if you want to unmute and ask specifically around transracial adoption and finding yourself. But I think the question reminded me also that, in my own writing process, I find that writing is the way that I get clarity. So I may be going into a specific topic or trying to articulate something that I don't have the clarity that I need, but the writing is something that helps me get there, right? Because when you actually have to put the words down, right? But Anthony, do you want to ask your question to the group?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Anthony Walsh. I am also a author, writer. I am with Strive currently and have a book coming out in the next half year or so here, 6 to 8 months, called Hockey is for Everyone. I grew up in Minnesota. I'm a transracial adoptee. Obviously from the title, I played hockey my entire life. I am, retired, I'd never, but I skate for fun. I coach now and everything. But kind of similar, actually. When all the unrest was happening, I just kind of felt almost compelled to sit down and start typing and having the experiences that I had, just in general as being a transracial adoptee, growing up in a very, if you're from Minnesota, I grew up in Edina, so it's a very white community. And so, that was interesting, and it was great, not in a negative way, but once you move out of your bubble, as people have also said, you realize very, very quickly how the world is. And so in 2020, I reconnected with my biological family, and that was really interesting as well. Great. I still talk with my family, my biological family and all that. But so that was part of a journey of discovering myself. And so I've taken a very long journey. I don't, want to fool myself and say I'm 100% there yet or anything like that, but I definitely am, farther along and happy with where I am right now. But just that there are, quite a few transracial adoptees also from Minnesota, stuff like that. I was just wondering if anybody was, willing to share just kind of their story of, how they have come to be very okay with the situation, finding themselves being Black and having grown up in a white community, maybe having, been things that people had said to you or that you accepted when you were younger kind of still eat away at you now because you're not that same person. You're wow, how could I ever have allowed somebody to say that? Or, I thought, when they said that, although, maybe I should have stuck up for this or that. So, just those examples. But how could you, or how have you come to terms with that? How have you grown and just made, a cohesive, had more, for yourself, been, had a more cohesive self? So sorry, that was kind of long-winded, convoluted, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, Anthony, this is Shannon. So I really appreciate it. Really appreciate the question. And I have to say, I have definitely friends and community, with mixed women and felt a sense of kinship, certainly with mixed people. But I think the deepest form of kinship that I've ever felt in my life and that I ever feel in my life is with other transracial adoptees. I have to say that. It's so transformative to just be in a space with other adoptees, because we don't have to explain things, like adoptee humor, which is actually very similar to Black humor, gallows humor, stuff that other people think is just like, oh my God, that's not funny. And we're like, oh really? Because that shit is hilarious to us, and you just, there's a sense of shame, I think, that a lot of adoptees feel at not being able to perform Blackness, right? Speak Black English, or my Korean adoptee friends, speak Korean, or they're not familiar with the food, all these things, and to not have to feel like you somehow have to hide that or backpedal. So for me, like that process, I didn't even have language for what I was. I didn't have language to say that I was an adoptee until I met other adoptees in my late 20s. And it's actually really beautiful. The house that we just bought this summer is the house that we had potluck in for years with a bunch of transracial adoptees. So it feels like a really beautiful sort of, everything coming together. And so, all identity, all community is, don't do that, please, is a process. And so, we're all works in progress. But yeah, I do feel like my writing and sense of community development and all of that stuff is so tied together in terms of stop it, please, or you're gonna have to go. In terms of transracial adoption. I know we're running out of time, and so I'll leave it there.
Hey, Anthony, I grew up in Edina around Lake Cornelia for a long time, so I'm feeling you. Oh man. So I often talk about the difference between being Black in Korea and being Black in the US. In Korea, you just knew. You just knew where you stood. It was very clear. You knew how to move. You knew how to run. You knew how to duck. Like I felt equipped to manage my Blackness in Korea. That was very in your face. Where immediately arriving in US, there was a layer of nefariousness that was kind of coated around no, you're just like everybody else, but no, you're not. And some of the statements that I remember like sticking out would be, people would talk, white people I'm saying, would talk about Blackness and then quickly look to me and go, well, not you. So it was like an othering of an othering, right? Not only do we not see color, but those people of those color are bad, but you're not, because you don't belong there, but you don't belong here either. So like when you've spent your entire life being disconnected from a sense of not only physical safety, but then the sense of dignity of who you are, then who am I if I'm not that or that or that or that? Then you're constantly kind of trying to figure that out. That is then your journey. Or the sense of belonging. We've talked about that amongst everybody here, right? This lack of, like, there's real deep rooted sense of belonging. So if our start into this planet is about disconnection, is about trauma, that separation from a felt sense of safety, dignity, or belonging, then our life's work is to reclaim those things. So I think a lot of us talk about finding ourselves because literally we've been separated from our sense of self, not only from our family of origin. And we're not just like humans once we come out, right? We're like these complex creatures that are connected by smell and all of our senses. And just because you plop us with a different family doesn't mean that we don't have a felt visceral memory of our original family. So why wouldn't we be seeking this sense of going back home, sense of reconnection, sense of who the hell am I then if I'm not that, or that? So I don't know if there will ever be an answer. I think the answer for me comes in stopping the looking for somebody else, because I was conditioned to find answers in whiteness, to find answers in academia, because my parents come from the academic world. And in fact, my brother is a professor at McAllister who's hosting this. Thank you very much. So I'm coming from this very look to these folks for answers. And when I stop doing that and going, what if the answers aren't there? What if it's my ability to reconnect with my sense of, one, ability to take care of myself and feel safe. And for me, that was moving to the middle of the ocean. The sense of dignity, like I can walk around and not have to answer your question of what am I? None of your damn business. That's the answer. Like when I could find my voice there. And then the sense of belonging. My belonging comes in, like when I look around and I'm living in stolen land in Hawaii, where it's been parceled out, all the best pieces to all of those people who don't belong here, you know, in the bigger sense, but we all belong here, right? So then my sense of belonging is, then my job is to not just speak up for adoptees or Black people, but it's to see injustice and to speak on that brings me back to my home. So healing for me, because I'm in the trauma world, trauma work. So then healing is about restoration to wholeness. So what does that look like for me? And then Adam, right on, it's like honesty is, if we're not going to be talking about the truth or telling the truth, it's not just Black truth or adoptee truth, right? We can't witness truth and speak on it if we're called to use our voices, find our voices first, then what are we doing? Yeah, I love that piece that you talked about, Adam. So I think it just, by the nature of the fact that we've been separated from our family of origin, makes us seeking. The fact that if we are living in a non-dominant color or skin or however we segregate one another, then we're gonna want to strive to restore to wholeness. So that striving, I think, my peace comes in trying to make peace with that peace. It's like, I'm going to be continually looking for ways to reconnect to wholeness.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we are quickly running low on time. And I think, you know, one of the things that's standing out for me with this powerful panel is really complicating our notions of even just the idea, the concept of racial and ethnic purity in and of itself is a myth, right? And so when we look and see how these ideas map onto particular bodies, you know, as Adam says, right, that imperialism, coloniality, exploitation, these things are trafficked globally, right? And we each experience them and have to navigate them in different and complicated ways. And as much as we can get out of simplistic notions and simplistic narratives of pureness of identity, you know, the better we can actually start to grapple with issues of power, with issues of the relationships between human beings in really important ways. And the writing of folks who are grappling with these issues as fundamental ways of knowing, I think, are really important for us to understand. So I want to thank the panel. And everyone else also, please give a round of applause or use some reaction emojis or whatever the case may be. You can feel free to unmute.
Y'all have been awesome.
I'm going to turn it back over to Sister Raquette to close us out for the day.
Actually, thank you so much, Brian, but I'm going to turn it over to Brother Nura, who will close us out for today.
Okay, well, I want to thank Brian. Excellent job moderating that discussion. That brilliant panel. I know it made some pieces easy for you. Thank you again, stellar panel. And I put links to the different panelists and the moderator, some of their personal websites and work that they're doing. You got to follow these 5 brilliant seeds in our community. Their writings, their work is awesome, and it's really building our community, I feel. Their writings and their work is awesome, and I know that's why, you know, the collaborative that we had really wanted these particular people on the panel to share with everybody else. And so with that, also, I would like to see if Hannah is on the line still to put up that slide of Dr. Karinga. So I want to invite everybody to our last panel or not panel, but discussion, dialogue actually with Dr. Milana Karinga. He's a professor of Africana Studies in California University, Long Beach there. Prolific writer. I mean, you can see 17 books, 4 co-edited books, 57 articles, 42 book chapters, 650 columns. That's ridiculous. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about our tradition of writing, our heritage of writing. You know, African people are known definitely for their oral, but I think we're at least as much or maybe even more known for our literary heritage as well, going way back. But he'll be talking about that, but also this whole thing of identity. I think Brian hit on it, that, you know, the fallacies and the myths of these identities that kind of strike us, makes it real confusing, and for our upbringing, especially for children coming up, and the writings and the things we read, the things we learn in school, and people's perceptions make it very difficult for our children and us. And so he has some thoughts and inklings about this identity piece and our communities and the breadth of it and the diversity of it. And so he'll be in here in January. We believe it's the 4th. I don't have a date right there because we confirmed it, but not exactly confirmed it, but we'll let everybody know. But I think it's the 4th Saturday of January, same time, 2 to 3:30. Hope you guys all join us. We'll send out emails to remind you of that. But with that, again, thank you. And hopefully we'll see you next month. You guys have a great break and holiday. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Hey,
you.
thanks so much.
Good job.
Before
Well
we
done.
go, yeah,
This was awesome. Appreciated it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shannon.
Wow.
Awesome.
Awesome. Hey, I just want to say really briefly before the folks go that it's always been my vision for the reconstruction.us website that be a place for many writers. And so if any of you are interested in, it includes short story, you know, memoir type pieces, as well as commentary. And I have a podcast as well. I'd be eager if any of you at all are interested in sharing your work. So I'll put my email address up here in the chat as well. And this was just fantastic. What a thrill to meet you all. Thank you.
Yeah.